the whole classroom froze. Professor Strickland, the toughest teacher in the entire university, stood in front of the blackboard with a cruel smile on his face. His voice cut through the silence like a knife. "So, old lady," he said loudly, pointing his chalk-stained finger, "if you think you belong in my class, then prove it. Answer this question right now." Everyone turned to look at her. An old woman, with silver hair tied in a neat bun and glasses slipping down her nose, sat quietly in the middle row. She looked like someone's grandmother who had wandered into the wrong room. She wore a faded blue sweater, her hands resting calmly on her notebook. The professor grinned like a wolf. He wrote a huge equation on the board, numbers and symbols twisting across the surface like a puzzle from another world. Even the smartest students whispered nervously. It was a kind of question that could take hours to solve, if it could be solved at all. "This," the professor sneered, "is something even my brightest students can't handle. Let's see if you can, or if you'll just embarrass yourself in front of everyone." The class waited for the old woman to panic. Some students even covered their mouths, ready to laugh. The air was thick with suspense. But then she did something no one expected. Slowly, the old woman stood up. She didn't look scared. Her eyes, sharp and steady, locked onto the problem. She picked up a piece of chalk, and with one smooth motion, she walked straight to the board. The classroom gasped. Even Professor Strickland raised an eyebrow. She lifted the chalk, and with a confident smile, she wrote down the first number. But before she could finish, Professor Strickland slammed his hand on the desk. "Stop! If you get this wrong," he barked, his voice booming, "you'll never set foot in this class again." The room went dead silent. And then the old woman's lips curled into the faintest smile. 2 weeks before that shocking moment, no one in the university had ever seen the old woman. On the first day of the semester, students were rushing to grab their seats when the classroom door creaked open. The sound made everyone turn. In walked a woman who looked far too old to be a student. Her hair was white, her back slightly bent, and she carried a stack of books so heavy it almost touched her chin. She placed them on the desk with a thud that made the front row jump. "Excuse me," she said softly. "Is this the advanced mathematics class?" The students exchanged looks. A few chuckled under their breath. One boy whispered, "She's lost." Another girl muttered, "Maybe she thinks this is bingo night." But the old woman didn't seem to hear. She found an empty seat in the middle row and began taking notes with a fountain pen, her handwriting neat and perfect, like calligraphy. When Professor Strickland walked in, his sharp eyes scanned the room and stopped on her. He didn't smile. He didn't even greet the class. He just stared at the woman, his jaw tightening. For Professor Strickland, teaching wasn't about helping. It was about power. He was known for humiliating students until they dropped out of his course. He called it separating the weak from the strong. To him, the old woman was a target too easy to resist. Over the next few days, he started small. He mocked the way she wrote notes. He laughed at her slow walk to the board. He even asked the class, should I give her knitting needles instead of a textbook? Most students laughed nervously, but a few began to notice something strange. Whenever Strickland scribbled a long equation on the board, the old woman's eyes followed every line. Her pen moved with impossible speed. By the time he finished, she already had the answer written in her notebook. And then, one afternoon, a student sitting beside her peeked at her notes. His jaw nearly dropped. She had solved not only the professor's question, but also the question hidden behind it, the one most students didn't even realize existed. Who is she? The student whispered. The old woman looked up, her calm eyes gleaming. You'll know soon enough, she said softly. Cliffhanger. That night, Professor Strickland decided it was time. He would embarrass her in front of the entire class. He began planning a question so difficult it was meant to break her. The morning of the big test, Professor Strickland walked into the classroom with a wicked grin. He clutched a stack of papers under his arm, but he wasn't interested in the students' assignments. Today, he had something more exciting planned. "Good morning," he said coldly. "Today, we're going to have a little experiment." The students groaned, expecting another impossible pop quiz. But when Strickland's eyes locked on the old woman, they knew this wasn't just another lecture. "You!" he barked, pointing at her. "Stand up." The old woman calmly placed her pen down and rose to her feet. She didn't look nervous. Her sweater hung loosely on her shoulders, and she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone much younger. Strickland strode to the board and began writing furiously. Chalk squealed against the surface, leaving behind a monstrous equation filled with twisted symbols, impossible fractions, and lines that stretched almost across the entire board. Some students leaned forward, squinting in disbelief. "Sir," one boy whispered to his friend, That's from graduate level physics. We don't even know half those symbols." "Exactly," Strickland said, overhearing him. His grin widened. "This isn't for you, it's for her." The classroom buzzed with whispers. Students nudged each other, half excited, half nervous. "Now," Strickland sneered, dropping the chalk. "Solve this. Do it quickly. Or prove to us all that you're just a foolish old woman wasting everyone's time." The old woman's eyes moved across the board. She didn't flinch. Instead, she adjusted her glasses and walked toward the front. Every step echoed in the silent room. Strickland folded his arms, confident that this was the end of her act. But then, something unexpected happened. The old woman turned to the class, her voice calm but sharp. "This question," she said, "is not only solvable, it hides a trick." The professor didn't write it correctly. Gasps rippled through the room. Students looked at the professor, then back at her. Strickland's face froze. "What did you say?" he snapped. She pointed at a tiny fraction he had written. "Here, you copied it wrong. If left as it is, the problem collapses into nonsense. But if corrected," she smiled faintly, "it becomes something quite beautiful." The classroom was dead silent. Students leaned forward in disbelief. And then she picked up the chalk. With lightning speed, her hand flew across the board. Numbers and letters lined up perfectly, flowing like music. What looked impossible a moment ago now began to form into a clear, elegant answer. The class erupted into murmurs. Some jaws dropped open. Professor Strickland's smug grin began to crack. Sweat glistened on his forehead. And just as the old woman lifted her chalk for the final stroke, the classroom door suddenly creaked open. Everyone turned. Standing there was a man in a dark suit, holding a leather briefcase. He scanned the room, his eyes landing directly on the old woman. "Dr. Eleanor?" he said in a deep voice. The chalk trembled in midair as the entire class turned to stare at the man in the doorway. "The doctor?" one student whispered. He called her doctor. The old woman slowly lowered the chalk, her calm eyes resting on the man in the dark suit. Her faint smile never left her lips. "Yes," she said softly. "It's been a long time." The man stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. He carried himself with authority, like someone who belonged in government meetings or top-secret labs, not an ordinary classroom. Professor Strickland stiffened. "Who are you?" he demanded. The man ignored him. His gaze never left the old woman. "Dr. Eleanor, I've been searching for you. Your disappearance, it shook the entire research community. We thought you were gone forever." AC and A, bud, hard, A, 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 A. The room exploded with whispers. Disappearance? Research community? Wait, she's a scientist? The old woman, Dr. Eleanor, simply set the chalk down and brushed her hands together, as though the problem on the board was child's play. I didn't disappear, she said. I walked away. After decades of working on theories that governments wanted to use as weapons, I chose silence. I wanted peace. A classroom seemed like the perfect place to hide. The students stared in awe. It was like something out of a movie. Professor Strickland's face turned pale, then red. He slammed his hand on the desk. Ridiculous. Do you expect us to believe this fairy tale? She's nothing but an old woman who just corrected your mistake. One brave student interrupted. The class chuckled nervously. A few even clapped. Strickland's eyes narrowed, his pride boiling like fire, but the man in the suit wasn't smiling. His tone was serious. Dr. Eleanor, I'm afraid peace won't last. The equation you are solving right now, it connects to the work you abandoned years ago. And if you finish it here, in this classroom, he paused. The room held its breath. Someone very dangerous will know exactly where you are. The students froze. The tension snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Dr. Eleanor's eyes darkened. She turned slowly back to the board, her hand hovering just inches from the final stroke that would complete the solution. Then I suppose, she whispered, the choice I make next could change everything. The chalk hovered just above the board. The entire room held its breath. Dr. Eleanor's hand was steady, her eyes sharp. The unfinished equation glowed with hidden power, a puzzle that only she seemed to understand. Professor Strickland, red-faced and furious, leaned forward. Well, what's it gonna be, doctor? He hissed. Show us your so-called genius or prove you're nothing but a fraud. The students shot him angry looks, but no one dared speak. The man in the suit stepped closer, his voice urgent. Dr. Eleanor, if you complete that equation here, every government, every corporation, every shadow organization that has been hunting you will know where you are. They'll come for you. For all of us. Gasps filled the room, but Eleanor didn't flinch. Slowly, she turned to face Strickland. Her calm, gentle smile returned. You wanted to embarrass me, she said softly, but you never realized something important. What? Strickland snapped. She leaned closer, her words sharp as glass. You can't embarrass someone who knows exactly who they are. And with that, she turned back to the board. The chalk screeched as she drew the final line. In a matter of seconds, the impossible equation folded into something simple, something beautiful. The last number clicked into place like the final piece of a puzzle. The classroom erupted. Students cheered, some standing on their chairs. She solved it! She actually solved it! Professor Strickland staggered back, his mouth hanging open. His cruel smirk was gone, replaced by disbelief and fear. Eleanor set the chalk down. Her eyes flicked toward the man in the suit. They already know where I am now, don't they? He nodded grimly. Yes, they'll be here soon. The cheering died. Silence swept through the class. Students looked at each other nervously, realizing this was no ordinary math problem. Eleanor took a deep breath and pulled off her glasses. Her sharp eyes glittered with fire, nothing like the frail grandmother everyone had mistaken her for. Then it's time, she said. I didn't come here to hide. I came here to teach the next generation what real knowledge looks like and to finish what I started. The ground seemed to vibrate under their feet. Distant rumbling echoed through the halls, like heavy footsteps or something worse approaching the classroom. The man in the suit dropped his briefcase on the desk, snapping it open to reveal strange glowing devices. Dr. Eleanor, we have to move. Now. But Eleanor raised her hand, stopping him. No, she whispered. Let them come. I want them to see what true genius looks like. The students leaned forward, their eyes wide, their hearts racing. Even Professor Strickland couldn't move, frozen in the shock of his own downfall. And then the classroom door slammed open with a bang. Figures in black suits stormed inside. The battle for Dr. Eleanor had begun.